=script_start, =. 6 games into the competitive season, and the narrative surrounding Zagdry sits at a precarious 2-3 record. It is a baseline that has sparked intense debate across the community, forcing analysts and fans alike to dissect every single frame of footage to understand why a roster with this much potential is currently underwater. The tension is palpable, the critics are getting louder, and the pressure on the coaching staff to find immediate answers is reaching a critical breaking point. But the wildest part? This structural instability goes way deeper than anyone realizes, pointing to a fundamental systemic flaw that threatens to derail the entire campaign before the halfway mark. To fully comprehend how this crisis unfolded, you have to look directly at the tactical blueprint established by Femtono, whose strategic influence has become the central focal point of this entire roster dynamic. In the opening matches, the primary objective seemed clear, as the system tried to lean heavily on established execution patterns to stabilize the map. The execution in these early phases was designed to be clean, deliberate, and calculated, aiming to isolate variables and control the overall pacing of the match. Remember this detail, because the early reliance on these specific setups becomes crucial later when we analyze how opposing analysts managed to map out the team's entire playbook before the first month of competition even concluded. But that was just the surface of what was happening here. As the schedule progressed into the mid-season stretch, the structural cracking became impossible to ignore, forcing a visible shift toward the tactical adaptations of Falerie. This transition was supposed to inject fluidity into a stagnant system, introducing the Sonos-born defensive layers to absorb aggressive mid-map pressure from top-tier opponents. Instead of creating a balanced defensive posture, however, the integration looked disjointed, leaving massive gaps in communication and positioning that elite squads exploited with clinical precision. Each round exposed a recurring vulnerability where the handoff between defensive coverage and aggressive counter-pushing completely collapsed under pressure. And this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected, revealing a desperate internal tug-of-war between competing tactical philosophies that tore the team's identity apart. Rather than committing fully to the defensive stabilization offered by the Falerie protocol, the team suddenly reverted to a highly volatile version of the Femtono system. This constant back-and-forth created massive identity confusion on the field, where players looked visibly hesitant, caught in two minds between holding their ground or pushing for high-risk trades. The numbers from these specific map rotations paint a devastating picture, showing a massive spike in unforced errors and completely blown defensive assignments during these transition phases. Now here's the part that should make you angry as a fan or an analyst, watching this organization operate behind closed doors. When the system desperately needed structure, the leadership chose this exact moment to experiment with the highly speculative Falerie variations. Introducing a completely new tactical layer in the middle of a high-stakes competitive stretch is an astronomical risk, and the execution on display proved they were nowhere near ready for it. The spacing was completely broken, the trade fragging windows were missed by full seconds, and the overall cohesion looked more like a pickup team than a professional roster competing at the highest level of the sport. But the tactical bleeding did not stop there, as the coaching staff doubled down on their experimental philosophy by cycling back into a condensed Femtono framework, specifically utilizing the controversial kitty setups. This move felt less like a calculated strategic adjustment, and more like a panic reaction to a season that was rapidly spinning out of control. It represents a massive paradox in their coaching philosophy, trying to capture lightning in a bottle with hyper-specific situational counter-strats, while the foundational fundamentals of their map control were completely crumbling beneath them. You cannot build a championship-caliber team on gimmicks, yet that is exactly what this staff attempted to do during a vital stretch of the season. And this is where it gets personal for the players who are out there sacrificing their individual statistics to make a fundamentally broken system work. Following the failure of the kitty experiment, the team reverted right back to the core Falerie protocols, searching desperately for any semblance of defensive consistency they could cling to. Imagine being a professional athlete and having your entire tactical directive rewritten every single week, shifting from heavy aggression to passive containment without any time to build muscle memory or spatial awareness. It is a completely unsustainable environment that destroys player confidence, breaks team chemistry, and ultimately reflects a total lack of long-term vision from the top down. When you look at the final data points of this 6-game stretch, the cyclical loop becomes undeniable, ending exactly where it started, with a desperate regression back to the baseline Femtono system. The evidence is right there on the tape, showing a team that has trapped itself in a continuous frantic circle of panic adjustments, moving from one philosophy to another without ever fixing the root cause of their struggles. They are treating the symptoms of their poor execution instead of curing the disease, which is a fundamental lack of disciplined teamwork and structural identity. Every counter-argument suggesting that this team just needs more time to gel completely evaporates when you realize they are changing the rules of their own game every single match. Because here's what this all means going forward. If this organization refuses to break this destructive cycle immediately, We have seen this exact trajectory happen before with highly talented rosters that refuse to commit to a singular cohesive identity, and it almost always ends in a complete teardown of the lineup. If you look at the financial implications and the looming roster lock deadlines, the management does not have the luxury of waiting around for another 6 games to see if these mismatched systems magically click together. The competitive field is moving too fast. The top teams are getting too disciplined, and a 2-3 record can turn into an insurmountable deficit in the standings before you even realize the season has passed you by. Ultimately, the responsibility for this tactical disaster lands squarely on the shoulders of the leadership team that designed this fragmented playbook and expected the players to execute it flawlessly. You cannot expect consistency on the field when there is absolute chaos in the strategy room. And the constant oscillation between Femtono and Faileri has exposed a profound identity crisis at the very core of this organization. It is time for this coaching staff to stop hiding behind complex terminology, stop shuffling through experimental setups, and finally deliver a straightforward, disciplined system that allows their talent to actually play the game. But you have to ask yourself, do they actually have the administrative courage to admit their mistakes and rebuild this playbook from scratch? Or are we going to watch this incredibly talented roster completely burn out before the end of the year?